It had been 20 years, and the scars from my past were still there, hidden beneath layers of time and distraction. I was content. Or at least I convinced myself I was. Raised by the Nelsons, who had given me everything I needed, I never thought about my biological family. At least not often enough to make it painful. It was a different life now, a life where I had a solid career in IT, a small apartment in the city, and friends who were kind but distant. It was easier that way. But when the message came, it was like everything I thought I knew about myself and my family was suddenly put under a microscope. The Facebook notification was simple enough. Hello, Matthew. My name is Evelyn Harper. I believe I'm your biological mother. I know this may sound unbelievable, but I need to talk to you. It's urgent. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. The words burned into my mind. I hadn't heard from them since the adoption papers were signed. My biological parents. The people who had given me away because I wasn't the daughter they wanted. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to block the message and pretend I'd never seen it. But I didn't. Instead, I replied, my hands shaking. Why now? Her response came within minutes. I know this is difficult. I've thought about you every day since we had to let you go. But I need you to know something. You have a sister, Lily. She's in need of a bone marrow transplant, and the doctors say you're the only match. The words echoed in my mind. You have a sister. You're the only match. I didn't even know how to process it. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to. My initial instinct was to tell her to go to hell. After all, they hadn't wanted me. But the part of me that still felt like a child, the part of me that had longed for an answer to the question of why they'd given me up, was too curious to walk away. I replied, I'll meet you tomorrow. We need to talk. The meeting was set for a cafe in the city. I walked there slowly, my thoughts racing. My emotions were a tangled mess. Did I want to help? Did I owe them anything? Did I even want to meet the sister I never knew I had? When I walked into the cafe, I saw Evelyn immediately. She was sitting at a corner table, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her posture stiff as though she was waiting for an important meeting. She looked like a woman who had aged a little too quickly, a little too gracefully. The years had been kind to her, but the exhaustion in her eyes was unmistakable. As I approached, she stood up, her hands trembling. Matthew, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You're here. I didn't know how to respond. She was my mother, but everything about her felt unfamiliar. How do you greet someone who left you behind for no reason you could understand? I gave a stiff nod, sitting down across from her. You said you needed to talk. Her eyes were full of unshed tears. She didn't say anything for a moment, as if collecting herself. Then finally she spoke. Lily, your sister. She's very sick. She's in the hospital, Matthew. She needs a bone marrow transplant, and you're the only person who can save her. My chest tightened. Lily. The name felt foreign, like a ghost in the room. I didn't know her, didn't even know she existed until a few hours ago. And now she was dying, and they were asking me to help. I leaned back in my chair, my heart hammering in my chest. You gave me up for adoption, and now you're asking me to help her? After all these years. Evelyn's eyes filled with sorrow. I know what we did was wrong. We didn't have the strength to keep you. Your father, he wanted a daughter. He couldn't accept having a son. I was weak. I went along with it. Her voice cracked as she continued. But that was the biggest mistake of my life. And now, Matthew, we need you. I could feel the anger building in me. I had spent years pushing down the hurt, telling myself it didn't matter. But hearing it now, hearing her admit how easily they had discarded me, was too much. I don't owe you anything, I said, the words coming out sharper than I meant. You didn't want me. You didn't care about me. She flinched, but then her expression softened. I never stopped thinking about you. Not for one day. I'm sorry, Matthew. Please, we need your help. Lily doesn't deserve this. She doesn't deserve to die because of mistakes we made. The pleading in her voice got under my skin. I wasn't sure if it was guilt, empathy, or something deeper, but I couldn't ignore it. So what? You want me to just come in and save her life? I asked, my voice filled with skepticism. Her eyes filled with tears. Yes, but, Matthew, it's more than just a transplant. I don't know what you think of us, or what you think of me, but I swear to you, we didn't want to hurt you. We made a terrible choice, and now I can't live with myself. Please, for Lily. Please save her. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I needed space, air. I walked to the window and looked out, the noise of the city outside feeling far away. I wanted to leave. I wanted to say no. But somewhere deep inside me, I knew I couldn't. I turned back to face her. Where is she? Evelyn smiled through her tears. St. Mary's Hospital. Room 302. I didn't know what I was getting into, but I knew I had to go. I had to meet my sister, and I had to decide whether to save her or leave her to face the consequences of my parents' choices. I arrived at St. Mary's Hospital an hour later. The sterile smell of antiseptic hit me the moment I walked through the door. The hospital was bustling, but everything felt muffled, like I was walking in slow motion, caught between two worlds. I was about to meet someone who had the same blood as me, someone I should have known my whole life. But she wasn't a child, a baby who could be forgiven for the sins of our parents. She was a teenager already scarred by the family that raised her, and by the family that abandoned me. I found room 302 after what felt like an eternity of searching. When I pushed the door open, I froze. The girl in the bed didn't look sick at all. She looked strong, her long, dark hair falling in waves around her shoulders. The way she was sitting propped up against the pillows, with her eyes fixed on a book, made her look almost normal, too normal. It took me a second to register that this girl, this woman, was supposed to be my sister. Lily's eyes flickered up when I stepped in, and for the first time in my life, I saw someone who looked like me. We shared the same sharp jawline, the same set of eyes. She wasn't a mirror of me, but there was a familiarity to her. Something in the way she looked at me, like she already knew who I was before I ever spoke. Matthew? She asked, her voice quiet but not shy. Her gaze was steady. I nodded, not trusting my voice. For a moment, I wondered if I had made a mistake, if I was just playing out some cruel family drama that wouldn't matter in the end. But the quiet vulnerability in her eyes made me hesitate. She was only a few years younger than me, but in that moment, she looked like a child who had been forced to grow up far too soon. Yeah, I'm your brother. I let the words hang in the air, unsure what to say next. Her lips curled into a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. I didn't think I'd ever meet you. The silence between us felt thick. I had no idea how to start this conversation. We had 20 years of missed moments, and I had no idea what to fill the gap with. All I could think of was what Evelyn had said, that she was sick and needed my help. Cleared my throat. How are you feeling? Lily blinked, and for a moment, I saw her mask slip, a flicker of something darker crossing her face. But then she composed herself, her shoulders straightening. I'm fine, really. They keep telling me I'll be okay now, that the transplant is the last piece. Yeah, I muttered, my mind reeling. About that, how are you handling all this? I mean, everything. She shrugged, her fingers tracing the edge of her blanket absent-mindedly. I don't have a choice, do I? She said softly. It's not like I can do anything about it. My life's been controlled by doctors and schedules for as long as I can remember. My whole life's been about surviving, Matthew. There's no room for complaining. Her words hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't just a sick girl asking for a second chance at life. She had learned to adapt to a reality where pain and uncertainty were constant companions. I felt an unfamiliar sting of guilt. It wasn't just my biological parents' fault. I had abandoned her too, hadn't I? I'd let them make all the choices. Walked away without even trying to understand what she'd gone through. I'm sorry, I muttered, before I even realized I was saying it. I didn't know about you, or what happened. She looked at me for a long moment, like she was measuring me. I'm not looking for an apology. I'm not angry at you. I raised an eyebrow. You should be. Her lips twitched at the corners. Maybe, But being angry at something I can't change is pointless. There it was again. That quiet strength that made me feel both ashamed and awed. She wasn't a helpless victim in need of saving. She was a fighter, just like I was, in her own way. Before I could say anything else, the door opened, and Evelyn stepped in, her face pale and drawn. I hadn't noticed how much older she looked until now. Her hair streaked with gray and her eyes hollow from worry. "Matthew," she said, her voice strained. "I'm so glad you're here." I nodded, but my stomach churned. "You didn't tell me everything." Evelyn's face tightened, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she stepped further into the room, sitting beside Lily's bed. "I know. I've been trying to protect you both." "From what?" I asked, suddenly irritated. "The truth." She hesitated. "David, your father." I stiffened at the mention of him, my jaw tightening instinctively. "What about him?" Evelyn glanced at Lily before meeting my gaze again. "He's not the man you think he is, Matthew. And he's not the man I thought he was either." I didn't realize how much control he had over me, over everything we did. I didn't know how to get away from him. I blinked, thrown off guard by the raw honesty in her voice. I had expected her to justify her actions, to tell me how hard it was to raise a son and a daughter, or how David had been the controlling one. But she wasn't doing that. She was admitting to her mistakes, and it was harder for me to hear than I had expected. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Evelyn turned to look at Lily, her eyes filled with regret. "David always wanted a daughter. When you were born, he couldn't accept it. He wanted a girl, Matthew. He couldn't understand why you weren't that. And I let him push you out of our lives. I couldn't stand up to him." Lily shifted uncomfortably in her bed. "I don't know if you're looking for forgiveness, Mom," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But I've learned to live with it. We all have." I stared at both of them, a gnawing anger bubbling in my chest. David. It all came back to him. The man who had pushed me out of my own life, my biological family, and now he was controlling everything again. "Where is he now?" I asked, my voice thick with tension. Evelyn's face darkened. "He doesn't know you're here. I didn't want him to, but I can't keep hiding things anymore. I don't want to live in fear of him anymore." My mind was spinning, thoughts tangled. The guilt, the anger, the helplessness. I had been away from all of this for so long, but it felt like it was pulling me back in with an unforgiving force. "Tell me where he is," I demanded. "I want to confront him." Evelyn's eyes widened, a flicker of fear flashing across her face. "Matthew, don't. You don't understand. He'll destroy everything. He always does." But I was already standing, my resolve hardening. "Then maybe it's time for him to be destroyed." I drove without thinking, my knuckles white on the steering wheel as rain streaked down the windshield. My mind replayed Evelyn's words. "He doesn't know you're here." That lie was too obvious now. David knew. He always knew. He was the kind of man who stayed 5 steps ahead, controlling everything in the shadows. I arrived at the address Evelyn reluctantly gave me. A sprawling, decaying house at the edge of town, surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusting chain-link fences. This wasn't just a home. It felt like a trap. The house loomed in the darkness, its windows dark and hollow. No lights, no signs of life. My stomach twisted, but I pushed forward, yanking the door open and stepping into the suffocating stillness. The air smelled faintly of mildew and something acrid, something wrong. The interior was quiet, too quiet. I moved through the narrow hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like a scream. "David!" I shouted, my voice ricocheting off the walls. "Come out and face me." Nothing. Just the wind howling through a broken window. My breath hitched as I continued deeper into the house, searching, waiting, daring him to show himself. Then I heard it. A faint shuffling sound coming from upstairs. I sprinted toward the staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time, adrenaline surging through me. As I reached the top, I froze. The hallway stretched endlessly, lined with closed doors. The shuffling came again, from the last door on the left. I advanced slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I couldn't. Not now. I pushed the door open and nearly collapsed in relief. It was empty. Just a ruined bedroom with peeling wallpaper and shattered furniture. Wind rattled the broken window, making the curtains billow like restless ghosts. I took a shaky breath, my pulse still hammering. I was about to leave when I noticed something strange. A thick black cable snaking along the floor, disappearing into the wall behind a shattered dresser. My stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but there was no one there. The lock clicked audibly from the other side. Trapped. Matthew? A voice drawled from the hallway, low and cruel. David. I lunged at the door, pounding against the heavy wood. Open the door. I roared. His laugh echoed through the house. Cold, hollow, like metal scraping against stone. I knew you'd come back. Sooner or later. I pressed my back against the door, breathing hard. Where's Lily? You really think you can save her? His voice slithered like oil through the crack beneath the door. You think you can undo everything I built? I clenched my fists. She's not yours to control anymore. His laugh deepened, resonating with something far more dangerous than rage. Amusement. You still don't get it, do you? She's always been mine. You're too late. Desperation clawed at my chest. I threw my weight against the door again, ignoring the sting of splintering wood against my shoulder. It held firm. Then, faintly, I heard it, a single muffled scream. Lily. Fueled by panic, I hurled myself against the door one last time. The old wood groaned before shattering under my weight. I stumbled into the dark hallway, disoriented, ears straining for any sound, any clue. Another scream, closer this time. I ran. I burst into the back room, the source of the sound, and found her. Lily was tied to a rickety chair, her face pale but defiant despite the bruises on her arms. David stood behind her, a knife glinting in his hand. Let her go, I shouted, my voice cracking. David tilted his head, almost curious. Why? You think you're the hero now? He traced the blade down Lily's cheek, making her flinch. You think saving her erases what you are? What I made you? You didn't make me anything? I snarled, taking a slow step forward. His eyes gleamed with dark amusement. You've always been weak. That's why I got rid of you. A boy was useless to me. You were wrong, I hissed. In a blur of motion, I lunged at him. We crashed to the floor, the knife skittering across the wooden planks. He was stronger than I expected, his fists landing sharp, brutal blows, but I fought with everything I had. Every ounce of anger, every scar from the past. I managed to twist free and drive my elbow into his jaw. He staggered, momentarily stunned. I grabbed the knife, my chest heaving. David laughed, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Go on, do it. Finish what you came here to do. For a breathless moment, I considered it. Every brutal memory, every wound he'd inflicted, on me, on Lily, on Evelyn, flashed before my eyes. But I couldn't become him. No, I spat. You're done. I kicked the knife far out of reach just as the sound of distant sirens pierced the air. Evelyn must have called the police after all. David lunged again, but I caught him this time, pinning him against the floor with every ounce of strength I had left. The front door exploded inward, and uniformed officers stormed in. They dragged David away, his curses fading as they hauled him into custody. I stumbled toward Lily, cutting the ropes binding her wrists. She collapsed into my arms, trembling. You came back, she whispered, her voice raw. I'll always come back, I promised, holding her tightly. The next few weeks passed in a blur of police interviews, hospital visits, and endless questions. David was charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, and a dozen other crimes. He'd never hurt anyone again. Evelyn disappeared after the trial. Part of me understood. She needed to escape her past as much as I did. As for Lily and me, we moved far away together. We didn't talk much about what happened. We didn't need to. We had survived. We had each other. And for the first time in my life, I finally knew what family really meant. Did this story leave you speechless? Tell us what surprised you most and check out more dramatic tales on our channel.